Good evening, friends. This is Tim Kirby Russia, where I, Tim Kirby, discuss Russia with you. Who am I? I am a radio talk show host and a political analyst who's written about Russia and spoken about Russia for a very long time. I'm one of the very few people who actually really know the history, geopolitics, and society of Russia that can tell you all this information in unbroken English. And that's why we're here today. And our big topic is cancel culture. And our guest is going to be Sarah Westall. She's coming later in the program. You'll have to wait for her. She is someone, like many people, including the 45th President of the United States, who has been canceled, removed from social media life just because of the way she sees things. So we're going to talk to her very soon. But now let's get into the history of cancel culture within Russia. So one important nuance when discussing cancel culture is the difference between it and censorship, okay? Censorship is when you can't say certain words on TV, you can't show certain body parts on TV. Back in the Soviet Union, if a music album had certain references to maybe sex or drugs or something capitalistic, it wouldn't be allowed to be owned or sold on the territory of the Soviet Union, right? So when we're looking at censorship, we're looking at something very specific, okay? Something very, a specific rule, a thing you can't show, something you can't say, very concrete, bureaucratic. But with cancel culture, it's more about getting rid of the person. It's getting the entire person, their entire view, off of social media, basically out of society. It's almost like putting someone in exile without having to maybe physically shove them onto some remote island like what happened with Napoleon, right? So that's kind of the difference. It's more that the censorship is more about blocking certain acts, whereas cancel culture is about essentially making someone's persona disappear. And so let's take a look at the history then of cancel culture in Russia. Well, there's definitely one period of time in Russia when a lot of things were canceled, and that would be the Russian Revolution. And probably the best example of that was in 1918, they had elections. And about, I think, 5 or 6 parties showed up to the elections, including some communism skeptics. Well, that was 1918. The next time elections rolled around, things are already very different. So when the Soviet Union, the young Soviet Union, determined that it would become a one-party state, that was really a good example of cancel culture, because essentially it didn't matter what you had to say. If you were against the Bolsheviks, the big party that won, you're out. It doesn't matter if you're something very similar, because remember, some of the early parties, like the Socialist Revolutionaries and the Mensheviks, the minority, it's a terrible name for a party, the Minority Party, but the Minority Party, the Mensheviks and all that, they were actually sort of different takes on what this communism would be, almost like in America, how especially during the Cold War, you really saw the Democrats, the Republicans being sort of like the two sides of the same coin, two flavors of the American idea. Well, Russia had that, communism I should say, the Soviet Union had that for a bit, and then killed it. And that is the first example of cancel culture, for sure. Now, that might sound awful from an American standpoint, but there's something you have to understand about Russian culture. In Russia, it's not really like in America where there's sort of a left and right, A, B, blue, red. There tends to be more of a normalcy, and surrounded by that normalcy, extremism. Generally, in Russia, you'll see that about 70-80% of people tend to kind of want to all get together and agree on one thing. This probably has to do with Russia's sort of imperial consciousness that if we're going to have this big land empire with all these people, we need to have some overall major agreements and let the little stuff kind of slide. And that's why in today's Russia, despite their efforts to make this two-party system here, which they've kind of been trying, it doesn't seem to work. Generally, most Russians sort of vote for one big bloc with some outliers around the edge. And in a lot of ways, it actually leads to kind of stability in Russia, but it can also lead to a bit of stagnation. That's one of the great things about America that allowed America to work. Despite the fact that there were some differences of opinion, more or less throughout America's history. And that's one of the great things about America, because throughout American history, more or less, there's been an agreement that the Constitution is awesome, the Founding Fathers were great guys who had great ideas, and the Bill of Rights is amazing. That has held America together. But the scary thing is, guys, that's changing. As we're seeing right now, especially on the left and the more extreme that it gets, it is very much pulling away from those core uniting ideas into a separate entity. And that's very dangerous, because with that separate entity, and that's very dangerous because when people have nothing to agree about, they can't form a society. And if you can't form a society, but you're all living in the same territory, that can lead to 1920s Russia. And we definitely do not want that to happen in the United States. Because if that does, a lot of us are going to get canceled forever very quickly. So anyways, that was a look at cancel culture in Russia. Let's get to our big interview with Sarah Westall, who is a conservative blogger, YouTuber, researcher, and I would say maybe more than anything, a true journalist. But before the interview, I'd like to ask you to have a little bit of patience. For some reason, something was happening with Sarah's internet. It wasn't going very smoothly in the first minute or two. So have a little bit of patience because it all smooths out and it'll be nice and even a couple minutes in. Okay, so without further ado, here's the big interview with Sarah Westall. Okay, Sarah, you are one of the big victims of canceling, aka purging, of conservatives and right-wingers from social media. Could you please tell us about your personal experience being canceled?
I really get to the edge of science, the edge of society, the edge of government and change. And when the coronavirus hit, I really got almost, obsessed with trying to figure it out with all the good people I have and my network. And I had some of the best doctors in the world that I was talking to. And YouTube started deleting all my videos with doctors. And this was right up front, March timeframe. And, the funny thing is as this narrative's coming out, what they said is all true. It's all coming out now, but they decided and took it upon themselves that I was spreading disinformation when I was not, and then it's all coming out. And, it flowed from there. I also was a supporter of Donald Trump. And that, as the election started going closer, because he was doing doing really great work at cutting down the trafficking networks. He has more trafficking networks were shut down under Donald Trump than any president, than all the past presidents combined. I mean, he was doing amazing work helping children.
You'd think the liberals would be so happy to hear that far less children are being treated, bought, and sold like farm animals. Perhaps some of the clients are in Washington. So YouTube took down your videos about the big bad sickness that's out there. Well, I don't know. Is that really so bad? Is that all the censorship adds up to?
But right before the election, October 15th, a couple weeks before the election, they took down all the pro-Trump channels, the ones that had the largest who were pro-Trump, right before the election. And then Twitter took us down right when right after that January 6th situation. They took Donald Trump, they took me down the same day as they took Donald Trump down, forgot. And then they went and took down my website and then my Patreon. I had over 1,700 supporters on Patreon that really funds a lot of my show. And they took me down, my Patreon, and then my website down the same time. My website was getting quite a bit of views.
Okay. One could argue that the social media companies, they're private companies and they have the right to set whatever silly and cryptic community standards they want. But you had your site taken down. That's insane. You own that. How could they do that? So what were the official justifications for having your site taken down?
Twitter, I think it was something about spam, which I don't know, whatever that was. It's a violation of their code or whatever. Well, what specifically? They didn't tell us. They had, go look at our list of things that and how you're supposed to behave, and they have a list, and I violated it, but I don't know how. Abusive behavior, I don't know. But they also put out there that I was banned on October banned because of the election. That was very clear. But because they banned all of us at the same time, anybody who was pro-Trump, and could sway. We were leaders in the sense of swaying opinion, and that's what they wanted to get rid of. I'm sure that's how I interpret it. Now, what did they say? Nothing. And when you appeal them, it's a big black hole. So who knows? You appeal it, nobody ever contacts you again. They send you this real generic reason, so nobody knows. And then they're telling anybody that talks about election fraud, because that's misinformation, their channels are going to get removed.
So you believe you're canceled because you're talking about human trafficking, vaccines, electoral fraud, and so on. Could you please give us more of the details about this? What exactly did you say, and what was your evidence?
Project Talon. It was called Project Talon, and it was hunting down and taking those traffickers off the street and out, and if they catch them on the border, because a lot of the human traffickers, it's tied with the human smuggling to get people into this country. It's also tied with the drug cartels. It's very tied. They use the same trafficking networks, the same tunnels. It's very sophisticated process, and it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And you can't have a multi-billion-dollar industry without people who are in power, in high levels of power, managing that. And when Trump was trying to take all this stuff down, and now you got them doing this, they claim it's for human, because we care about people, and we have to. And you can spin it to a certain degree to talk about some of those issues, people who need asylum, people that we're all a human family and stuff. But underneath all that is this human trafficking issue, and the fact that they stopped Project Talon, and they have all these unaccompanied minors that are being brought in by the drug cartels, and we know that a multi-billion dollar industry has very high support in the highest levels of our government. What do you think is going on? I can't prove it, but it sure looks fishy, doesn't it?
Although I may regret asking this question, could you please tell us the specifics of how human trafficking works and what the end goal is?
Yeah, over 800,000 kids are trafficked just in America alone each year, not counting the kids that are trafficked over the border from South America. This is a worldwide terrible phenomenon. The kids are trafficked for everything. And from what I am finding out, these children are put through hell. They are made to have sex, if you will, with some gross individual who wants it, but they're made to do it 12 times a day or whatever they said. I mean, a lot. And they do it for years. And then once they're done with the kid, because the kid no longer can they're just a mess, then they use them for organs and other things. And it's a really, really ugly industry. It's very lucrative.
Ma'am, you have to understand that that's a pretty big claim you're making. So big that it begs the question, if this grand conspiracy is so massive, how come us normies haven't heard about it yet?
Okay, well, it might be a big claim, and that's the problem, is that the human trafficking aspect of this, if they covered it and didn't ban it, a normie, if you will, would know all this. There is so much information. There is so much data out there. There are so many whistleblowers out there trying to get this information across. The fact that a normie doesn't know it is the saddest thing that someone can tell me. The fact that I need to provide extensive proof to prove that is the saddest thing, because there are whistleblowers upon whistleblowers screaming at the top of their lungs trying to get this information out. But I could provide you reams of information. I have a series of interviews with Detective Rostein, who was the top human trafficking detective in New York. And he took down more human traffickers than anybody, and I have about 6 hours of interviews with him, and he says the same thing.
Okay, so if you're being canceled left and right on the territory of the United States, why haven't you gone east on the internet, to the Russian internet, to services like VK or Telegram? Because guess what? On those, you're as free to be as American conservative as you want to be.
Well, no, the Telegram, I'm starting to build up. People are building up their Telegram accounts. And we're using that. Russia is lucky because Russia's cleaned out some of their issues, and a lot of those, when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of those people that were creating problems in Russia came to the United States, and we welcomed them while you guys were cleaning house. And so that's why we have our issue and you don't. But you're an American, so you probably have seen both sides of that.
Oh, I have. And one of the things that actually doomed the Soviet Union was the fact that they had exit visas, which they rarely gave out, meaning that they wouldn't let their citizens leave the country. Now, if someone's a bit unhappy with U.S. foreign policy like I am, he is free to go try life somewhere else and maybe come back with a better appreciation for America. In the Soviet Union, that was not the case. You were either born there and dealt with it, or you are born there and fought against it. And because you trapped all your dissidents, all your disgruntled people within your borders, it basically fostered the perfect climate for revolution against the Soviet Union. Yes, letting self-hating Russians fly away to London to feel better about themselves and take a big dump verbally on their country of origin has been a boon to Russian state security. But anyways, you were talking about other options in the social media world. Could you tell us more about that?
Amazon took down their servers, and then they got a new server farm set up. Parler did. And and people are, like in my situation, when GoDaddy took mine down, the actual employees were like, oh, we don't do this. It wasn't the employees, but it was their federal crimes unit that took my site down. And they wouldn't tell me what I did wrong. What did I do wrong? If I committed a federal crime, why isn't there, what did I do wrong? You can at least tell me what I did wrong. I shouldn't be so confused. And if it's a crime, then why am I 2 months later, all I get is this generic thing taking my site down. 2 months later, I'm still here without anybody telling me what I did wrong. I'm bad enough to take me down, but not bad enough to tell me what I did wrong.
Ooh, alternative media. That is a nice, sexy sounding title. But the problem is, most people want to sit on their butts, enjoy something familiar, and they're fine with YouTube. They've got their silliness, they got their cat videos, they have some footage of guys being kicked in the groin. That's all they need. How are you going to make these alternative media outlets become viable?
Well, and that's where we have to keep working to educate the normies, if you will, that this is not, you need to reach beyond YouTube and that you're being controlled. Back under President Obama, it used to be illegal in our country to do propaganda. They still did, but it wasn't so bad. Back under President Obama, and I can't remember the legislation, but because I covered it in detail in the past, because it's been a while. But they put through legislation that made propaganda legal against the American people. Once they opened that up, it became this huge can of worms that propaganda is now allowed to be done against the American people. And that's what we're seeing. I also am working on a documentary. I did part 1 of the documentary called Mind War. It's the difference between propaganda, psychological operations to mind war. And I'm starting with the leaked military document from 1980 that talks about what those things are. And that they're proposing to go from, because there was an official psychological warfare done in our military. It was made official in 1952. And that's very well documented. And this particular leaked document, which I have, you can find it, and I have it on my website, states it as well, where they did official psychological operations. Whenever they do a combat or they do war or with the countries that they need to deal with, they do psyops on people, and they talk about different ways to do it. And they use Vietnam as an example where the psyops were done against us and we did it to them, but we didn't win the hearts and minds of the American people, and that's why Vietnam didn't work. That was the example they used, okay? And then they talked about the difference between why we need to go to mind war, and mind war is the difference in psyops and mind war. Psyops are accessories to a war, and mind war is the war. And that everything's about winning the hearts and minds of the people. But if something's not a truth, we will that truth to be a truth. So if people, so they will create the truth that they need to create, and we will it into existence. That is from this document. And then they talked about technology that needs to be used in order to cause people to be more apt to believing different ideas, like ionization of the sky and all these. They talked about it in this document. Since then, there has been books put out by people from the Pentagon, different generals and different people who've written books about mind wars and the things that you can do and the technology and the things that we have done to do that against people. But when President Obama made it legal, the propaganda legal, that made that whole phenomenon legal. And that's what we're dealing with. And so the only way to go around it is to keep educating people as much as possible and work on building these other platforms. My son is creating an application. He's almost done with it. He's ready to go into beta probably within a week or two. And what it's going to allow is it's a utility to be able to allow videos to go on all these different platforms. Anybody that has a API that he can work with, so that we can help these other platforms get content and build up these other platforms and sort of start supporting these other networks and platforms. We have a fascist situation here with YouTube and Twitter and some of these social media companies, and it's destroying our country. Completely destroying our country. And that's the only thing we can do is keep sharing. I tell people to share our videos and keep working to build up these alternative platforms, because if we don't do that, we are in trouble. And I also ask people, don't rely on YouTube. Please don't use that as your major source. Try to help build up these other platforms like Odyssey and BitChute and, Gab and all these other things. Because if we as citizens care about keeping this country, we have to work on building these other. And it's not just about America, it's about the world. I mean, do we want to be a free people, or do we want to have a fascist dictator, a global government that's not elected, telling us what to do?
Well, Sarah, I think you understand how my audience and I are going to vote on that issue. But the problem is, the cards are stacked against us.
We have some serious issues, but we have some bigger issues too. It's all tied to the global reset. It's tied to some, you got to look, people have to dig a little deeper and look at this data and this information, because it's all out there. I've done documentaries on it. I've done, pointing to data as much as I can. I'm saying some big claims because I've done hundreds of hours of interviews to get to the point where I make a claim like that. And so that's where I'm coming from. I'm not coming from somebody who hasn't done extensive research in these areas.
Friends, in conclusion, I'd like to quote one individual who's also been canceled, just like I have, just like Sarah has. And that person has achieved great successes and is probably one of the big pioneers in the fight against such cancel culture. He said, "There's a war on for your mind." And isn't that the real origin of this cancel culture? I think he's on to something. But anyways, friends, we have the full, uncensored, uncut interview of Sarah Westall with myself coming out very soon. Stay tuned for that. She gets into greater detail later in the interview, so we left some nice gold nuggets there for you to find. But anyways, please like and especially share this program so other people see it. If we can't get eyes on this program, it'll die. I need your support. Thank you very much for being with us. We'll see you in the next episode.